What kind of life do you live when four wedding rings end up side by side beneath the same earth? I'm 91 years old, and every Sunday I walk the same quiet path between headstones, talking softly to four women who once called me husband. Before you judge me, or feel pity or curiosity, let me break the ice. Nothing about this story is simple. Marriage, love, loyalty, guilt, forgiveness. None of them stay clean and neat after 7 decades of living. They tangle, and they leave marks. And sometimes they end up resting in the same row of graves, listening to a man who still doesn't have all the answers. The first time I stood there with 4 names carved in stone, I wondered what other people must think. A man married 4 times, 4 wives buried beside each other, an old man talking to them like they could answer. But the real mystery is not why I married 4 times. It's why I still feel married to all of them. Why every Sunday I sit on that cold bench between their graves and talk as if our story hasn't ended yet. Maybe you think love has an expiration date. Age teaches you otherwise. When you live 91 years, people assume your memories fade. Mine haven't. I remember wedding vows spoken with trembling hands. I remember laughter in kitchens, arguments behind closed doors, long nights of silence, small reconciliations that meant everything. I remember secrets we never said out loud and words we said too late. I remember the moment I lost each of them in 4 different ways, and how every loss rearranged my life like furniture in the dark. So why are they all buried together side by side? Why do I keep coming back every Sunday, as if our conversations never stopped? I'll tell you, but not yet. Because the truth isn't a single sentence. It's a lifetime of choices, mistakes, promises kept and broken, and the kind of love that doesn't disappear just because the body does. Stay with me, because what I say to each of them is different, and the reason matters more than you think. When people hear that I still talk to my wives every Sunday, they think the story is only about death, but it isn't. It is about understanding life before it runs out. And this is where I want you to step in for a moment. Tell me in the comments what part of this story speaks to you, because reflecting on these experiences together matters. It helps us see our own relationships more clearly. If you're watching this, it's probably because life, love, marriage, secrets or loss are already somewhere in your heart. Leave a comment and share your thoughts, because your perspective might help someone else who is going through something similar. And if this story feels important, don't forget to like the video so it reaches more people, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next in this journey through long life, love and marriage. I'll take you back to where it began, before 4 graves stood in a row, when there was only 1 ring and a young man who thought love was simple. I was 21 when I married my first wife. We were both clumsy with hope, convinced that the world would listen to our promises just because we believed them. We had nothing except tiny furniture, loud dreams, and the certainty that forever meant exactly what it sounded like. We planned whole decades in whispered midnight conversations, talking about houses we didn't own yet, and children who didn't exist. Back then, I thought marriage was a straight road. You walked hand in hand, not a winding path that keeps asking who you really are. She laughed easily, my first wife. She had that kind of smile that made you forget whatever you were worried about. We fought, of course. We were young, proud, stubborn, both trying to figure out how to be adults while pretending we already were. But every argument ended with the same belief. Love solves everything. You don't realize until later that love doesn't solve. It reveals. It shows you where you're selfish, where you're soft, where you still need to grow. With her, I learned what it means to be responsible for someone else's heart, and how frightening that responsibility becomes when you understand you can fail. Our life together wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary in the most beautiful way. Breakfasts half-burned, long walks with empty pockets, promises to do better next month. Then came the moment no one prepares you for, the day ordinary life breaks. Loss does not knock, it enters. One day I had a wife who teased me about misplacing my glasses, and the next day I had silence where her voice used to live. People say time heals, but it doesn't heal. It rearranges. You learn how to walk around the place where something used to be. That first loss carved something into me that never faded. It taught me that vows don't end when a life ends, that love doesn't evaporate just because you're left behind with the dishes and the unread books. It also left me with a quiet guilt, the kind no one can see. The things I didn't say enough, the apologies I thought I'd have time to make, the plans I kept postponing because I believed there would always be another year. Standing at her grave for the first time, I understood how fragile later really is. And yet, life kept moving, stubborn as the seasons. People asked whether I'd ever marry again, as if love were something you simply replace. I didn't know the answer then. I only knew that my story with her didn't feel finished, even though the world said it was. That unfinished feeling followed me for years and quietly shaped every choice that came after, including the second time I dared to stand before someone and promise forever. How do you open your heart again when part of it is still living in the past? I didn't plan to remarry. I honestly believed my life had already had its great love, and that everything after would just be a long echo of what I'd lost. But life has a strange way of testing the stories we tell ourselves. I met my second wife on an ordinary afternoon, in the middle of an ordinary errand, at a time when I thought nothing extraordinary could ever happen again. She laughed at something I said, and for the first time since my first wife died, I realized my grief had made me forget the sound of my own laughter. Loving again did not feel romantic at first. It felt like betrayal. Every smile came with guilt, as if happiness were something I was stealing from the woman I had already buried. I carried my first marriage like a shadow into my second, and that shadow sat with us at the dinner table, rode with us in the car, slept between us at night. My second wife understood more than I ever said aloud. She never tried to replace the first. She simply stood beside the memory and made room for both of us to exist. That kind of generosity is its own kind of courage. We built a different kind of marriage, quieter, more careful, less dazzled by youth, and more aware of how fragile everything is. We didn't make loud promises about forever. We made small promises about tomorrow, about being kinder, listening better, not wasting days on pride. Yet even in that tenderness, I carried fear. When you've buried love once, you walk through life waiting for the next phone call, the next diagnosis, the next goodbye. It changes how you hold people, tighter, but also more gently, because you know how easily they disappear. And then, as it tends to do, life asked me the same question again. Loss returned, different in details, but familiar in weight. I thought the second time would hurt less because I'd been through it before. That was another lie we tell ourselves. Grief does not repeat, it multiplies. The second loss didn't erase the first. It stacked on top of it, and I found myself talking to two graves and wondering how many pieces of a heart a person is allowed to lose and still keep living. But here is the part I rarely admit. She taught me something the first could not. My second wife showed me that loving again is not erasing what came before. It's proof that the first love mattered so much it didn't destroy your ability to feel. She made me realize that love doesn't replace, it expands, painfully, imperfectly, but honestly. And even through the guilt and fear, even through the second round of goodbyes, I knew that closing myself off would have been the greater betrayal, not to them, but to my own life. By the time I reached my third marriage, people thought I'd grown used to loss, as if grief were something you practice until it doesn't sting. They were wrong. What changed wasn't the pain. It was my understanding that love is never as tidy as we wish it to be. My third wife came into my life during a season when my family already carried cracks beneath the surface. Unspoken resentments, misunderstandings that hardened into distance, words swallowed instead of said out loud. She had a warm patience that made everyone around her believe things could be repaired if we were brave enough to tell the truth. But truth is rarely simple. With her, the story wasn't only about love between two people. It was about the weight of families, children from previous chapters, loyalties that overlapped, histories that didn't always fit neatly together. There were secrets that had been kept to protect people, and like most secrets, they eventually demanded to be heard. One day, something long buried rose to the surface, not loud, not dramatic, but quietly, powerful enough to change the air in the room. It wasn't a scandal fit for newspapers. It was the kind of revelation that forces everyone to see themselves honestly. Who was neglected? Who felt unseen? Who had been silently hurting for years? In that moment, love stopped being poetic and became practical, about apologies that arrived later than they should have, about learning how to listen instead of defend, about admitting that good people can still wound each other without meaning to. My third wife was the one who pushed me, gently, firmly, to face the parts of myself I preferred to keep in the dark. She believed families are not broken by the truth. They are broken by never speaking it. That belief cost her energy, tears, and more courage than I understood at the time. We went through a season where the house felt like a storm had passed through it, furniture unchanged, but everything emotionally rearranged. Yet even in the middle of tension, she stayed. She did not choose the easy road. She chose the honest one. Only years later did I understand how much strength that took. The betrayal we confronted was not of romance, but of absence. Times I wasn't there, moments I chose silence because it felt safer than difficult conversations. She forgave me before I had fully learned how to forgive myself. When I stand at her grave now, I don't talk about romance first. I thank her for the uncomfortable truths, for insisting that love without honesty is just performance, for helping heal rifts I had pretended not to see. And sometimes I wonder how different things might have been if we had all learned earlier to say what hurt us while there was still time to fix it. By the time my fourth wife entered my life, I was already an old man by most people's standards. My hair was thin, my hands shook when I buttoned my shirt, and I had already buried 3 chapters of my heart. I wasn't looking for romance anymore. At least, that's what I told myself. What I truly feared wasn't life without passion. It was life without witness, without someone who knew my stories and could say, "Yes, I was there with you." Loneliness in old age isn't noise or silence. It's the feeling that your memories have nowhere to live but inside your own head. She was different. We didn't fall in love with fireworks. We fell in love over slow mornings, shared pills in plastic organizers, doctors' waiting rooms, and conversations about aches that came without warning. She understood loss, not as a concept, but as a language. We spoke it fluently together. Loving in old age is gentler. There's less pretending, fewer masks. You don't try to impress. You try to be honest. You know time is not a promise anymore. It's a loan without a due date printed on it. With her, marriage became less about building a future and more about honoring the present. We talked openly about things younger couples avoid. What to do when one of us couldn't walk anymore. Who would sign the papers? What songs should play at the funeral, and where we wanted to rest. She said something once that still echoes through my Sundays at the cemetery. Let us not compete for your love. Let us rest together. It wasn't jealousy, it was tenderness. She understood that my heart had many rooms, and never asked me to evict the past to make space for her. There was fear, too, not of loving, but of leaving, or being the one left again. Every cough, Every stumble, every late phone call, pressed old panic buttons, already worn by grief. Yet we laughed more than I expected two elderly people could. We held hands like teenagers at crosswalks, not for romance, but for balance. We talked about the weather and mortality in the same tone, as if both were simply parts of the day. When her time came, it arrived softly, like a curtain closing after a long play. I sat beside her and realized that loving in old age is not less intense. It's just quieter, distilled to its essence. No drama, just presence. And when she was gone, the fear I had carried all those years of ending up alone stood in front of me again. Except now, instead of fighting it, I made peace with it. My life had been full of goodbyes, yes, but also full of hellos that arrived when I least expected them. That is why they rest side by side now, my four wives, under the same stretch of sky. Not because I wanted to collect love like trophies, but because each of them shaped a man I'm still trying to understand at 91. On Sundays, when I speak to them, I thank the last one for teaching me that love in the final stretch of life is not about possession. It is about companionship, dignity and courage in the face of the inevitable. People always ask the same question first. Why are they buried together? They expect a legal story, a clause in a will, some dramatic final request. The truth is quieter and stranger. It began as a practical decision. Plots purchased years apart that somehow opened up in the same row. But it became something else, something that felt like the story arranging itself. When the fourth headstone was placed beside the others, I had the unsettling feeling that life had been writing a pattern I hadn't noticed while I was busy living it. That was the moment the Sundays began. I don't go there to perform grief. I go there to continue conversations that never finished. With the first, I talk about promises and youth, and the impatience that makes us believe later is guaranteed. With the second, I speak about guilt, about how love can return and not erase what came before. With the third, I talk about truth, about the secrets families carry like heavy furniture no one admits needs moving. And with the fourth, I talk about aging, fear, and the strange comfort of being seen when your body has already begun to betray you. I don't ask them for signs, I don't expect answers. I simply refuse to let our stories end in silence. There is another reason I have never told my family in full. On those Sundays, I'm not only talking to the dead, I'm practicing being honest with the living. I say aloud what I couldn't say when they were here, the apologies that arrived too late, the gratitude I expressed too little, the love I assumed they already knew without words. And something unexpected happened. The more I spoke to the graves, the more I learned to speak to the people still standing beside me. That is the twist most people don't see. The cemetery taught me how to live, better outside its gates. One Sunday, I brought a chair instead of just my cane. I sat there for hours, the sun moving across the stones like a slow clock, and I realized I wasn't visiting four separate lives. I was visiting one long story told in four voices. Each wife had loved a different version of me, and together they formed the truth I could never see from inside any single marriage. I am not proud of every chapter, but I am responsible for all of them. So why do I keep going back? Because love doesn't end. It changes address. Because conversations worth having rarely fit inside the time we're given. And because standing in front of those stones reminds me to say, today, what I once saved for someday. If this part of the story touched you, tell me in the comments a single word you feel right now, maybe memory, regret, or gratitude. What do you learn when life gives you 4 chances to love and 4 chances to lose? At 91, I don't pretend to be a sage. I'm simply a man who has had more time than most to see where choices lead. Marriage is not one long feeling, it is a long series of decisions, to stay, to listen, to apologize, to try again, when it would be easier to close the door. Each of my wives taught me a different lesson about those choices, and together they formed the map I wish I had when I was young enough to need it most. From the first, I learned that love begins as a miracle and becomes a responsibility. It is easy to promise forever when the world is wide open. It is harder to keep showing up on the days that feel small and ordinary. From the second, I learned that the heart is not made of glass, but of doors. More can open without the others breaking. Guilt tried to convince me otherwise, but time revealed that loving again is not betrayal. Refusing to love again is. From the third, I learned that silence is its own form of betrayal. Families don't fracture in one dramatic moment. They slowly drift apart through things we are too afraid to say out loud. And from the fourth, I learned that companionship is not a consolation prize of old age. It is the distilled form of love, stripped of pretense and hurry. If I could speak to my younger self, I wouldn't warn him about death, I would warn him about later. Later is the most dangerous word in a marriage. Later I will say I'm sorry. Later I will take that trip. Later I will listen instead of defending myself. Later I will tell them how much they mean to me. Decades pass inside that single word. Most regrets are not about what we did. They are about what we kept postponing until time quietly closed the window. Loving someone is not about promising the future. It is about not wasting the present. And here is the truth that surprises people the most. I am still married, not legally, not formally, but in the ways that matter, in memory, in gratitude, in the daily tenderness of how I treat the living because of the dead. Those 4 women didn't just share my life. They shaped the man finishing this sentence. When I sit at their graves, I am not haunted, I am humbled. I see clearly that love is less about finding the right person and more about becoming the right partner, again and again, across the years you are given. And before we go any further, I want to ask you for something simple, because stories like this are not just entertainment. They are reminders. If you have ever loved someone, lost someone, carried regret, or held back words you wish you had said, then you already understand why this matters. So tell me in the comments what hit you the hardest from this part. Was it the danger of saying later, the weight of silence, or the idea that love can change shape but never truly disappear? You can even comment just one word like listen, don't wait, or say it now. And if you want more real long life stories about marriage, secrets, betrayal, forgiveness, and late confessions that people carry for decades, leave a like so this reaches the right person and subscribe so you do not miss the next chapter.